Islands are some of the world's most diverse ecosystems, but they're fragile, and invasive species can cause serious issues. Rats have invaded around 80% of Earth's islands. The UK controls 14 overseas territories, and it is important we protect these from rats. We must learn from New Zealand conservation practices, experts of rat eradication and biosecurity, and put the spotlight on one New Zealand island, which is a beaming success story of island restoration and invasive species control. Just off the coast of Auckland, New Zealand, lies TiriTiri Matangi, a lush, forested paradise supporting rich biodiversity. But Tiri has a very different past.
Once humans arrived on the island, the landscape certainly changed. From the 1850s to the 1970s, the island was extensively farmed, and as a result, 94% of the bush was cleared from the island. There were just a few forest species down in the gullies, and even then it wasn't good forest because the island had goats as well, and also the Kiori, the Polynesian rat, and they were inhibiting the growth of plants in the understory.
Rats and goats eating new growth meant Tiri was unable to flourish, lifeless and barren. A drastic change was needed.
The restoration project on the island began in the early 1980s when trees were being grown on the island for future replanting. In 1984, the first volunteers arrived and started replanting the island, and over the next 10 years, 283,000 trees were planted. So in 1993, they locked up the teal, locked up the takahe, and used helicopters to drop Brodificum, a poison which works very well on rats, over the whole island. And as a result, not one Kiori survived. Now, when you think prior to that, it probably had the highest rat density of anywhere on this planet. There were huge numbers of Kiori. So by getting rid of them, it really made a difference.
Without the rats, Tiri could begin to regrow. With the help of volunteers, a community spirit flourished, as did the island's biodiversity.
Over the years, TiriTiri Matangi has had 12 species of bird translocated. One of those actually happened well before the replanting program, and that was the kakariki, or red-crowned parakeet. And that was, I think it was in early 1974 they were first introduced. But once the replanting program started, new birds were arriving on a fairly regular basis for the next few years.
Tiri is now an open sanctuary. Species such as the takahe have been brought back from near extinction and are now thriving on the island. Its success has encouraged ecotourism opportunities, which provides income whilst fostering a healthy public perspective towards island conservation in New Zealand.
I think the most important thing that has happened is that by being successful, TiriTiri Matangi has inspired so many other projects, particularly locally, but also worldwide. People are looking what's happened there and trying to replicate the same elsewhere.
By the turn of the millennium, Australasian island conservation was world leading. Soon other regions were beginning to realise the importance of this field. The UK, with multiple offshore islands, being one of them.
The British Overseas Territories are 14 remote territories scattered around the world's oceans. Most of them are offshore islands, yet they're very poorly known by the mainstream British public. but they're incredibly important for conservation in the UK. The vast majority of British endemic species, that's species only found in the UK, are found on the British Overseas Territories. In fact, estimates suggest as much as 94%. And the vast majority of them are threatened by invasive rats and mice.
One such rat-infested territory was the remote oceanic island group of South Georgia.
South Georgia is an amazing place. Its location is why it's so special. It's 800 miles east-southeast of the Falkland Islands and can only be reached by boat, probably 4 days sailing away. People will get to either from the Falklands or South America normally. And South Georgia is positioned on the Antarctic convergence, which is where the cold waters from the south, from the Antarctic, meet the warmer ones from the north. And that causes an upsurge in nutrients, which attracts and creates a lot of marine life in that area. This was the reason why sealers and whalers came down to South Georgia to actually harvest those whales in the 1900s. And they brought with them the rats and the mice that our project was seeking to eliminate. Its bird populations have evolved in the complete absence of predators like rats and mice. They basically nest either on the ground or in shallow burrows, so they're really easy prey for the rats who just dived in and ate millions of chicks and eggs. Some of the species of birds on South Georgia were under threat of being eradicated altogether, the native species.
It was an all too familiar scene. The South Georgia Heritage Trust eradication team knew just where to look.
It was so important to us to have advice up front from the New Zealanders. We used the New Zealand Department of Conservation extensively to give us advice, and we kind of referred to them throughout the project. And what we needed was that specialist skill that the pilots had, because South Georgia is extremely mountainous, very craggy, and the pilots had to basically put a pellet of bait for the rats everywhere that they might possibly be. So it could even just be on a cliff edge. So those pilots really were having to do some incredible feats of flying to actually bait South Georgia.
The last bait dropped was in 2016. After 2 years of further monitoring, the project was confirmed as successful, going down as the largest ever eradication project in conservation.
But of course, our work is not done because, as everyone knows, the big concern is to have the biosecurity measures in place to make sure that the rats and mice can never get back again. So since then, we've been working with the government of South Georgia, which has put in place a biosecurity programme, which is now permanent, and we are still raising money to make sure that that programme can continue and stop rats and mice from getting back to the island again.
So the British Overseas Territories are very poorly known by most of the British public, and there isn't a huge amount of political will and support for funding island conservation projects on these remote offshore islands. The South Georgia shows what can be achieved if we are to put funding and support into protecting these incredibly important places.
Yeah, the actual eradication was wholly managed by DOC. Supporters of TiriTiri Matangi had very little to do with that. But I think the key point here is that the island would not be what it is today without DOC, and it wouldn't be like it is without the supporters of TiriTiri Matangi. We have worked with them well for many years, and it's a good partnership.
Unlike New Zealand, where they have a central department of conservation who are able to provide funding and support for island conservation projects across the country, there's no such similar body in the UK context with the British Overseas Territories, because they're all independent territories. And that makes it really difficult to coordinate and provide expertise to these islands all around the world. Gough Island is a perfect example. It's got a huge number of critically endangered species that are endemic to that, including most of the world's population of an albatross, the Tristan albatross. And the RSPB are currently looking to launch an eradication program to remove the mice from Gough Island.
I think the New Zealand Department of Conservation is a fantastic body of knowledge, and it would be wonderful if the UK could kind of follow that example, build up that expertise, and also be involved in lots of the eradication projects around the world, which hopefully we're starting to be with GOF.
This is an incredibly exciting field, and it's an opportunity to help protect some of the world's most threatened and important species, and to help restore some amazing island systems all around the world.
Invasive species eradication is just one branch of island conservation, a field rich with diverse, exciting and crucially important opportunities.
So much of the biodiversity of the UK is contained in its UK overseas territories, so being able to protect those is crucially important.
We get so many visitors, international visitors, local visitors, and many of them have come and said, well look, if you can do that there, we can do that on our local patch of bush, we can do that on our island, we can do that in our backyard. It really is an inspirational project.